One of the things that we are quite interested in here at Big is how seemingly mutually exclusive ideas can often perfectly coexist and create new hybrids. One of these things is we've worked with this idea called hedonistic sustainability, which was essentially a realization we had 10 years ago that sustainability was always being associated with some form of sacrifice. You know, like taking a cold shower, that you would accept a downgrade in your quality of life in order to afford becoming sustainable. But we're thinking, why not actually make a sustainable city or a sustainable building or sustainable life even more enjoyable than the alternative? And one of our first examples of this was the Copenhagen harbor bath, which essentially extends the public life of the city into the water. And it means that a clean harbor is not just nice for the fish, it's also wonderful for the residents, that you don't have to sit in a car for hours to get to the beach. You can actually jump in the port in the middle of the city. So your city is more sustainable, but it's also more enjoyable. And let's say over time, this idea of hedonistic sustainability has actually evolved into what we now call social infrastructure. And that's, for instance, like our offices here are a former Carlsberg factory. So they are the infrastructure of the industry of the past that are now like the perfect framework for a creative workspace. Everybody knows that a power plant can turn into the Tate Modern. And for instance, the second most popular park in New York right now is the High Line, which is a piece of decommissioned train tracks. So essentially decommissioned infrastructure that has now been added a layer of social and environmental programs. So what we like is this idea of what if you don't have to wait until the power plant shuts down before it becomes nice? What if you can actually design a power plant like the one we're building here in Copenhagen, a power plant that is so clean that you actually have only steam and a little bit of CO2 coming out of the chimney, but no toxins. So you literally have clean mountain air on the roof of the building. So as a result, we've turned that roof into a gigantic alpine ski slope. So suddenly what would have become a lost opportunity, like a big ugly power plant that casts shadows on the neighbors and block the views and pollutes the sky, suddenly becomes the new sort of social space and the new public park of Copenhagen. So again, like social infrastructure, this idea of taking seemingly mutually exclusive ideas, a park and a power plant, and turn it into a power park, if you like. The city of the future is already here. So let's say in 2050, the city is probably going to look very much like the city you already know. London is probably going to look quite a lot like London, and Copenhagen is going to look quite a lot like Copenhagen. But there'll be like these subtle differences, and you'll probably find that a lot of the structures are being used completely differently than they were like a couple of decades ago. Like in a similar way that, you know, if somebody was time traveling from 19th century London to 20th century London, they would probably be surprised to find that the Tate Modern was now one of the most desirable art museums in the city. They would be surprised to find that you know, this old capsule factory is a creative office. So I think you'll have a lot of transformation, and then I think you'll find that a lot of the things that were more obvious in the past, let's say when, for instance, when manufacturing was like incredibly sort of gas guzzling and sort of polluting, you really wanted to put manufacturing as far away as possible, and eventually with globalization you would even want to put it in South America or Asia. But I think now you're seeing a return of manufacturing to the city centers, where our office is in New York. We're right next to the Navy Yard, where they're actually moving this like a high skill, high tech manufacturing, rapid prototyping, 3D printing back into the city, because with clean technology, the dichotomies that used to be obvious, that you want to put this as far away as possible, suddenly become less obvious. And in that sense, I think the building we're doing with the power plant with the ski slope on the roof, which is this like very unlikely combination, but it makes perfect sense now that you actually have both clean air and huge roof surfaces. You're going to see a lot of those things where things that used to be like rather unlikely suddenly become very likely. From our office space in New York, we can look out over Brooklyn Grange, which is the biggest roof farm in New York City. So it's essentially a gigantic warehouse where you have manufacturing underneath, but then on the 16th floor you have like green acres of agriculture. So again, normally you would consider the urban and the rural as being juxtaposed or sort of opposites. Now those things are going to start to blend in ways we haven't even imagined before. Another aspect of architecture that I think is exciting, of course for architects, but could be exciting or should be exciting for everybody, is that architecture is the art and science of literally creating the world that we would like to live in. So let's say that our cities and our buildings are not the way they are because they always were or because they have to. They are the way they are because that's how we made them, or that's how our ancestors made them. And this is how far we've gotten today. But if our city doesn't fit to the way we want to live, then not only do we have the possibility, we actually have the responsibility to make sure that it does, and that to make sure that the city that we leave behind is even more the place we dream about. And I think a good example of this way of thinking is if you look at Lego or at Minecraft, which is arguably the digital version of Lego. What's exciting about this form of play is that it's not just allowing the children to buy into some kind of a premeditated environment. No, it's actually providing them the tools to create the world they dream about, that they would love to see, and then to inhabit it through play. So it's almost like it's empowering the child to create its own environment and then inhabit it. And I think in that way, both Lego and Minecraft are great prerequisites to create children and let's say young adults, future grown-ups, that are actually used to being able to transform their environment, to create the world they want to inhabit, and then go on living in it. And let's say of course, Minecraft of Lego, it's through the mediation of play, but when we grown up, it becomes doing exactly the same thing, but in the actual world we live in. I think one of the things that's very exciting for our most immediate future, and let's say the now and the next couple of decades, is that you can say like one of the great engines that have propelled the global economy is Silicon Valley. But they have been very focused on the digital realm, the immaterial realm, the virtual realm, the internet, software, and hardware. But now, over the last couple of years, this like vehicle for innovation has now started allocating its mental and its financial resources to the physical realm. So Google started mapping the globe. So suddenly we had like a digital version of planet Earth, including like Street View, like a fleet of cars driving around, documenting the world around us. Google are making driverless cars. Obviously Elon Musk has created the Tesla car. It's going into batteries, solar city, and now with the recent bid on Tesla to take over solar city to actually create this like sustainable energy behemoth is incredibly exciting. So I think what we're going to see now and over the next decades is actually like all of the innovation that happened in software and in the virtual realm is going to start really having a more significant impact on the physical environment. Like no doubt that the driverless car is going to have a massive impact on our urban environment. Also the noiseless and emissionless electrical car, of course, is going to mean that, you know, the sort of the impact on the air quality is going to be reduced. And of course you're seeing how, you know, just for instance, like in buildings, a recent innovation over the last couple of decades is in elevators is destination dispatch. That simply by telling where you need to go before you enter the elevator, the intelligence of the combined elevator bank can bundle people so that with the same amount of shafts, with the same physical space, you actually get a higher efficiency, you get a higher yield. And I think those efficiencies will start having an impact. You can also see it with basically with the Uber Pool is a form of destination dispatch taxi system. And once that becomes combined with driverless cars, you start having this sort of almost like possibility of swarm intelligence. And of course, needless to say, like one of the big innovations that we're going to see now is that because of the rise of processing power, the technology, let's say the digital technology innovation has now brought, let's say, both genetics but also nanotechnology up to a higher level. And I think one of the things that I'm excited about is, for instance, like in nanocarbon, the fact that graphene seems to be finally commercially available at an industrial scale means that you suddenly have a very, very theoretically inexpensive material, graphene, this like monomolecular filament of a carbon molecule, but that has like these almost like magical abilities. It's more transparent than glass. It's 200 times more conducive than copper, and it's 100 times stronger than steel. It's the kind of stuff that you read about in graphic novels, and this is actually becoming sort of commercially available within the next couple of years. So I think from an architect's point of perspective, now that Silicon Valley is finally interested in the physical world, we're going to have a heyday of innovation over the next decades. The people that I admire in the world of design are people that have taken upon them to fall in love with a particular aspect of design or a particular approach to design, and then use that passion to take it in a very special direction. So rather than trying to excel at everything, they've really sort of fallen in love with a particular subject, and as a result come quite deep with it. So for instance, John and Elora Hardy in Bali, they're in love with bamboo. So they're taking Balinese craftsmanship, which is like legendarily elaborate. You have like a highly elaborate set of skills of craft in the population, and then combining it with the amazing abilities of bamboo, which is not only incredibly fast growing, it's also a very strong and very flexible material. So they're making these highly imaginary structures for some kind of a back to basics but super luxurious form of living. Almost like this super interesting combination of the high and low in the same environment. Another example of a design practice that is going their own route is Johan and Amu from Company in Finland, and they're also interested in craft, but they're interested in the craft of the different industrial regions of the world. So they go, for instance, to Korea for a few months in a residency, and then they collaborate with the local craftsmen to develop new forms of products for their traditional craft. So, for instance, like the noodle shoe or the bibimbap are like examples that came out of this. Then they go to Finland. They work with Finnish craftsmen. They go to Bayern, Bavaria, in the south of Germany. Of course, there it's like shoemakers and it's the butcher industry. So they work with they made like little bags out of the gauntlets, the chainmail gauntlets that the butcher works with, so he doesn't chop off his fingers. So they're basically like going on these like excursions into existing historical crafts that are maybe because of the globalization and the development of the world losing some of their core relevance and trying to see if they can invent new relevance for it. And maybe a last example is Anton and Deborah Garcia Abril from Ensemble, Spanish architects that have created, for instance, like they built their own house where they basically used highway concrete elements like the giant beams that carry highway bridges or the giant trows for drainage and stack these gigantic elements on top of each other to create their own house. As a result, the trough, that is normally the gutter of a giant highway, becomes their swimming pool floating in the air. And the concrete beam is so big that it actually becomes a wall. And it's so fat that it actually is insulated enough to function in a Madrid climate in the same way that the castle wall had so much stone that it could actually insulate without rock wool. So in a way, they're trying to pick the elements of one kind of industry and use them in another one. So I think, on the overall, I think in the world of design, of course, at the end of the day, what makes you excel is the amount of care you invest into what you do. And one way of developing care for something is if you are deeply in love with the subject. So whether that is the love for bamboo or the love for like traditional craft or the love for the beauty of highway structures, whatever heart you bring into it, that's going to be what is going to make you sort of step beyond the status quo and actually discover new territory.